Hello and welcome to the Cornish Riviera. It's a beautiful sunny day and today we're talking about the Cuba blockade, the reasons for it, and we're going to find out how nations around the world are challenging Trump and sending oil and humanitarian aid to Cuba's beleaguered citizens. I read some news on X this morning that made my day. Here it is, have a look. It's about Mexico helping Cuba. For the average Cuban family in 2026, daily life is a desperate race against the clock. With the national grid collapsing multiple times a week and blackouts lasting up to 15 hours in Havana and over 40 hours in the provinces, households are forced to cook over charcoal or wood fires in the streets. Frozen food has become a luxury of the past. Without consistent refrigeration, the meagre portions of meat and dairy provided by state rations spoil within 48 hours, forcing families to eat everything immediately or watch it rot. The crisis has even severed the water supply, as electric pumps have failed, leaving thousands to haul buckets from tanker trucks while they navigate pitch-black streets using only the dim glow of cell phone lights. And you may ask, what did Cuba ever do to deserve a blockade which has destroyed the quality of life for everyone on the island? I checked with AI and it gave me a chart.
So the ideological conflict, apparently practicing a different system to your own, is a big problem. If only we cared this much about democracy when dealing with our oil partners in the Middle East, all of them autocratic nations. Then there's political and human rights. It's funny how human rights are only a deal breaker when we want to justify an embargo. But they're a footnote when we're signing arms deals elsewhere. Historical grievances. We're still fuming over property lost 60 years ago while the current population can't get basic medicine. Foreign policy differences, it's just code for you didn't ask for permission. It's a lot of high-minded vocabulary to mask the reality. We've spent decades punishing an entire population for the crime of not following our script.
So, does Cuba deserve all this? To be honest, I believe these are pretty flimsy reasons for destroying a country. Currently, around 72% of the world's population lives under an autocracy, according to the Economist Intelligence Unit. There are 60 authoritarian regimes and 36 hybrid governments around the world. And many of those countries are staunch allies of the US, such as Egypt and Jordan. And these countries receive large aid packages from the US. So the main valid argument the US has for victimizing Cuba seems to be that it nationalized some US companies years ago and wants to retain its independence. When Trump started his second term, I thought he was doing some good things, such as securing the borders and rooting out inefficiencies and corruption within government. But with Iran and Cuba, plus threats to Greenland and Venezuela, it seems he's lost all moral compass. Let's look at a brief history of all this. The story starts in 1960 after Fidel Castro nationalized American-owned assets. The US responded by cutting off Cuban sugar imports. At the time, around 80% of Cuba's export market. By the end of 1960, the US had effectively imposed a full trade embargo, blocking exports to Cuba except for food and medicine. And that embargo didn't just stay static, it hardened. In 1996, the Helms-Burton Act extended the embargo beyond US borders, penalizing foreign companies that did business with Cuba. This wasn't just sanctions, it became extraterritorial pressure, forcing other countries to choose between Cuba or access to the US economy. If we fast forward a little, under Barack Obama, there was a brief thaw in diplomatic relations. They were restored, travel eased, and then came Donald Trump. He reversed that approach almost entirely, reimposing sanctions, tightening travel restrictions, and redesignating Cuba as a state sponsor of terrorism. That designation really mattered. It scared off banks, investors, and shipping. And then there was Joe Biden. He comes in. Despite campaign promises, Biden kept most of Trump's sanctions in place, only easing a few restrictions like flights and family reunification. Even critics in his own party said this worsened conditions for ordinary Cubans. So by 2025, you've got continuity, not change. And then Trump returns, and this is where things started to escalate. In 25, 26, the US moves into what's effectively a maximum pressure phase again. Cuba is relisted as a state sponsor of terrorism. Sanctions expand on Cuban military-linked businesses. And then the critical move, the US begins targeting any country supplying oil to Cuba. An executive order in early 2026 threatened tariffs and penalties on countries exporting fuel to the island. That's not symbolic. Cuba imports most of its fuels, so what are the effects? Fuel drops, electricity drops, the system starts to fail, and now we're in the present where Cuba's national power grid has collapsed multiple times this month. Officials say they haven't received foreign oil shipments for months, and all this because of a US-driven oil blockade cutting off the national grid. But countries are starting to push back. Russia is reportedly sending oil tankers toward Cuba, openly testing US restrictions. Mexico had supplied oil, then halted shipments under US pressure. But we see now shipments are resuming. Mexico is officially pushing back despite President Trump's threat of 25% tariffs. President Sheinbaum just sent a new naval vessel packed with fuel and food. They're calling it humanitarian aid to bypass sanctions, basically daring the US to blink first. China, Russia, and Mexico are all listed as supporting Cuba during this crisis. It's developing right now, so keep your eyes on the Atlantic. A massive Russian tanker, the Anatoly Kolodkin, is carrying nearly 800,000 barrels of oil towards Cuba right now. It looks, in the next 48 hours, the US naval siege has a major hole in it because the US is tracking every major ship. A shadow fleet of older tankers is turning off their GPS and trying to slip into Cuban ports under the cover of night. It's cat and mouse on the high seas. But the bottom line is, it's just not enough. Havana hit its second total power grid collapse in a week. Millions are in the dark because these small shipments can't keep the lights on. The big question now, will the US Navy actually stop that Russian tanker? What does this actually mean? For decades, the strategy was simple. Apply pressure, create economic strain, force political change. But now you're seeing something different. Other major powers are starting to test the limits of that system. Not by speeches, by shipping oil. And that raises a bigger question. If countries begin ignoring US sanctions openly, then those sanctions stop being global and start becoming, well, kind of optional. Cuba today is under extreme pressure economically, politically, structural. But the real story isn't just Cuba. It's whether the US can still enforce a system where it decides who trades with whom, or whether that system is starting to fracture. And once that starts, it doesn't go back.